Do you know, have statistics came out in the last several years to show a rise or decline in drug arrests, incarcerations, and things of that nature here in Montana?
Sure, and the thing that was interesting is that the voters, for example, here in the city of Missoula, there was an ordinance that went into effect where they were talking about making marijuana the lowest priority for the sheriffs and police departments here. Right. And since that time, arrests have not slowed down. They've actually increased. So, you know, what's going on? Are we really making marijuana the lowest priority, or is that all just a bunch of talk, or are organizations not listening to what they should be listening to? You know, so.
All right. Well, we're running short on time today, but you've agreed to come on the show. I look forward to having you on there to ask some more questions and have our viewers call in and pick your brain.
Absolutely.
Can't wait to see what's coming up. Thanks, Taylor.
Thank you very much.
Great having us here today. Thank you.
Welcome back. I have the opportunity to say thank you for that interview, Taylor, and thank you so much for keeping that promise and being down here for our show today. It's great to have you.
Yes, it is great to have you.
Well, thank you guys for inviting me to come on. I really do appreciate that. This is a great opportunity to talk about this really important issue and where we're headed with this issue in the state. So.
Right. So, Taylor, can you give us a little bit of a background on how we got where we are?
Sure. In the year 2004, there was a voter-sponsored initiative that passed here in the state of Montana by a measure of 62% actually statewide, which is fairly significant. As a matter of fact, this initiative won in most House districts by a much greater percentage than the politician who was actually even elected in those House districts. Of course, there were a lot of House districts where candidates ran unopposed and then they won by a larger percentage. But 62% of Montana's voting population, which is a number of in excess of 250,000 people, voted for this initiative. When it first came about, the program started off very, very slowly. There were, a few brave souls who decided that they would put their name on this government list and say, I'm a medical user of cannabis. And the program pretty much progressed in that way very slowly and remained very small for a number of years. Then a memo was sent out by the Obama administration, which stated that federal funds would not be used to prosecute anybody in a medical state. So that means that if you were in a state that had a medical marijuana law on the books, the federal authorities would not go in and make any attempts to bust you. They wouldn't use federal funds to come in and prosecute you and do any of that stuff. So
that's been working out well so far?
Well, it's kind of interesting how that progressed. So basically what happened at that point, when that memo came out, we saw more people become comfortable with putting their name on this government list and becoming a part of the medical cannabis program. There were, a few individuals who exploited that and made a business out of actually getting people their cards. And so we had caravans and things going throughout the state and large numbers of people getting signed up on the program. That's when the perception of trouble started to happen here within the industry. They said, oh my God, well, how can we have, now at this point, 28, getting close to 30,000 Montanans, on a registry to use medical cannabis. So during the interim subcommittee, well, actually, let me back up here to last summer. The legislature realized that this was an issue that needed to be addressed. So a subcommittee, the House Health and Human Services Committee, was put together, and through the course of last summer, they met about 6 or 8 times and had input from the Board of Medicine, the Board of Labor, Board of Education, caregivers, representatives from law enforcement. And so basically a bill was put together through these subcommittee meetings. This bill went on to become House Bill 68, which Diane Sands sponsored and presented to the legislature. Unfortunately, the legislature, in my mind, was so focused on the repeal of this act. At that point, that was the only thing that they wanted to have, was just repeal of the Medical Marijuana Act. So many of the regulatory bills, which were good regulatory bills, were introduced earlier on in the session. And because the legislature was so sure that repeal was going to be the thing that happened, they shot down all of these regulatory bills. So House Bill 68 died, Senate Bill 154 died. Most of the regulatory bills, which were responsible regulatory bills, died because the legislature was so bent on repeal. Now, as we know now, the governor has vetoed HB 161, which is the repeal bill. So repeal is now not out there on the table. The only other thing that we have right now is Senate Bill 423. Now, the trouble with Senate Bill 423 is that the stated goals of Senate Bill 423 and the people who have been working on this bill are to reduce the number of patients in the state of Montana and to take all the money out of the industry. Now, as the number of patients on the registry grew, one of the unintended consequences, although I think it's a very positive one, is that an industry grew up around this.
Right, the numbers I heard were like there's 1,400 jobs created directly through this, and probably another 1,400 jobs created in other industries that are supporting the medical marijuana industry.
I would actually venture to guess that the number is much more.
Much higher.
There's over 4,000 caregivers in the state of Montana currently, okay?
You know,
when you're talking about the number of jobs that have been created, if we're looking, for example, at a storefront. So, you know, one of the places that I worked at, actually the first dispensary that I opened, had only 2 or 3 caregivers that were there, but those caregivers had other employees that worked in the business. So now you're talking about a receptionist, you're talking about your bud tenders, you're talking about managers, you're talking about the people who work in the production facilities, the gardeners, the growers, the master growers. You're also talking about the ancillary businesses that are supported by this, electricians and construction workers and alarm company technicians and locksmiths and mom and pop grow stores. And so it's not just the industry and the number of caregivers and people and jobs that this has created here. Really, the elephant in the room is that in the state of Montana, and this is according to the government's own statistics from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Statistics Association, it's a government agency, the number of Montanans who use marijuana in the state has remained static for the last 10 years. And it's roughly about 10% of our population. So that means that there's about 100,000 Montanans who smoke pot.
And about 1.2%. If there's at 28,000, there's a million, that's what, 2.8%?
Yeah, and so now 2.8% of them are now on the registry.
Legally using marijuana.
Legally. Now, the thing that's significant about that is the 100,000 Montanans who were smoking pot before we had a medical law in the books, and the number of Montanans who are using marijuana has not increased since the medical marijuana law has been put on the books. The only shift that's happened is that now the money that those people were already spending on their marijuana is staying here within the state for the first time ever. Not going to Canada
or Mexico or...
It's not going to British Columbia, it's not going to California, it's not going to Mexican cartels. That's money that is staying here within our state and churning within our economy. And, you know, economists will tell you for every dollar that's spent in a local economy, it churns at least 7 times. So now we're talking about money that's going to payroll, that's paying for rents, that's paying for insurances, and that's staying here within our state and stimulating our economy rather than going outside.
You know, bringing you back to some of the, I'm not going to say it right, ancillary businesses.
Ancillary, yeah.
That are involved and the people, the jobs that they get. One of those people is Jason Barkey, and I call him a master grower. He says he's more like a bud tender. But he works for TMCHF and is willing to be here with us today too. So that as soon as we open this up for calls, you'll be able to call in and ask questions about growing, and any questions you have for Taylor, we'll be able to field some of that too. Jason, why don't you go ahead and tell us about yourself and what you do, and meanwhile, the great folks in the back room can punch the phone number in and people can start calling.
Where I call myself a bud tender is we do have master growers, people that are basically good gardeners. And it works the same way with growing different types of flowers or different types of vegetables. There's a lot of variance in what you do with each individual strain or the different types of way to cultivate it. I don't consider myself a master grower at all. because even the master growers, I know every one of them said it's a learning process. Every time they start a new strain, there's people that are actually breeding different strains to come up with a more desired effect for medical purposes. And, you know, it's an art, and that's what I'll call it, it's an art. People that breed flowers, that's an art. It all works in the same way. There's a lot more, it's a lot more technical than just throwing out some seeds and watering it and, you know, think you're gonna have, you know, all this big, you know, buds or whatever within the industry. You have to have a controlled environment. It has to be clean. You have to, you know, take care of your plants. We have, you know, like with any garden, you have pests, you have blights or molds, and I mean, that all has to be took care of. The common misconception that I hear a lot is, you know, that it's easy. Well, in working in the industry, it's not easy. I mean, you're transplanting. There's all sorts of things that can happen and go wrong. You can have an electrical problem that will kill an entire crop. You can get an infestation of insects or a mold, and you have to start over. It's an agricultural product.
Just because they call it weed, you can't just throw seeds down and expect dandelions
Yeah,
and
so
buds to
what
pop
you're
out
saying.
in your front yard. 'Cause it,
Well,
right, and I get that. There's a lot of work, and we're ready. And my phone's not ringing, which really bums me out. So call in and give us your questions. Let us know what's going on, what you want to know. This is a live interactive show. We got 8 weeks here at MCAT to bring you this show, to bring you information. And Jason here, when we're done with the call-in section, is going to give a little demonstration on dirts and soils and mediums that you can grow in. Then we have Tiffany from Tiffany's Treats that's going to be here showing you how to make Rice Krispie treats in your microwave in just a couple of minutes. So we have a call now. Let's go ahead and see who that is. You're on Growing Green. Go ahead, caller. Oh, maybe we don't. Are you there, caller?
Hello.
I'm lost. Okay, well, we'll go back to where we were. Tiffany from Tiffany Treats is going to be here. Let's try again. Go ahead, caller. You're on Growing Green.
Yeah, hi. I had a question. Are there different kinds of strains of marijuana that can be used for different kinds of ailments? I mean, is one better for, say, a stomach ailment as opposed to back pain?
Yeah, there's two main families of cannabis. There's your cannabis sativa. There's actually three families of cannabis: cannabis sativa, cannabis indica, and cannabis ruderalis. Your cannabis sativa, and what distinguishes these different strains is the way that the cannabinoids are arranged by the plant. Your cannabis sativa is usually a taller, thinner, more spindly plant, and it has higher levels of delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, which is THC, which we all know is the psychoactive ingredient. They're effective for many conditions, including anxiety, a lot of disorders, PTSD. They're also helpful for things like appetite stimulation and to decrease nausea. Then you have your cannabis indica plants. The cannabis indica is shorter and squatter, broader leaves, and they have higher ratios of CBD and CBN as compared to a sativa plant, which has higher THC content. These strains